Question 3 is worth 12 marks. There are 1.5 minutes for every mark in this paper, so that gives you 18 minutes, including your reading time, to answer this question. Now, because you only have to answer on one text, I recommend doing question 3 before you do question 2, which is on 2 texts and therefore harder, even though it's worth less marks. Did I say less? Damn, it's worth fewer marks. But you'll notice it only takes me 13 minutes to do this because I dictate my answer. When you're watching the video, check out Word and how you can dictate in it. It's the best thing possible for your revision. Let's get to the question. Okay, because question 3 is worth 12 marks, I know that means I have 1.5 minutes per mark because I'm not spending ages reading the paper, I'm just going straight in. So that means I've got 18 minutes to read the extract and write. And so I'll write up here my end time for this so I know what time I have to stop writing my answer and move on to the next question. For most students, you will probably need to read the whole of the source up to those lines so that you make sure you understand what's going on when we get there. So let's read that extract now. If you don't want to hear me read it, jump ahead. "What time is it?" Simon asked. "Just gone 4. We don't have much time, do we?" I could see him weighing up the possibilities. I wanted to carry on down, but it was Simon's decision. I waited for him to make up his mind. "I think we should keep going," he said at last. Simon let me slide faster than I had expected, and despite my cries of alarm and pain, he had kept the pace of descent going. I stopped shouting to him after 50 feet. The rising wind and continuous avalanches drowned out all communications. Instead, I concentrated on keeping my leg clear of the snow. It was an impossible task. Despite lying on my good leg, the right boot snagged in the snow as the weight of my body pushed down. Each abrupt jerk caused searing pain in my knee. I sobbed and grasped and swore at the snow and the cold, and most of all at Simon. At the changeover point, I hopped onto my left leg, trying to think the pain away. It ebbed slowly, leaving a dreadful throbbing ache and a leaden tiredness. So I'm not sure what a changeover point is, but I imagine if Simon is having to lower Joe, then at some points Joe must be having to lower Simon. Okay, I'm coming up to lines 23 to 31, and I'm going to start writing my answer as soon as I get there. I'm not going to wait till I've finished reading all of lines 23 to 31. And what will I be answering? How does the writer use language? Well, that's always the same, so I knew that going into the exam, which basically just means quote and say what the method is. So I know to do that already. To describe how he feels, which he is it? Well, we know he's always writing about Simon, so the writer must be Joe. Okay, and this is the section I'm going to start writing about. Let's find out. The tugs came again far too soon, and carelessly I slumped against the rope and let myself go. So he's obviously being lowered again here. The drop went on until I could bear it no longer, so he must still be in pain. Yet there was nothing that I could do to bring the agony to an end. All right, he's in loads of pain. Howling and screaming for Simon to stop achieved nothing. The blame had to lie somewhere, so I swore Simon's character to the devil. Okay, so he's blaming Simon, and I've got a pretty good idea of what he's feeling as we get to the lines to answer the question. The terrible sliding stopped, and I hung silently against the slope. 3 faint tugs trembled the taut rope, and I hopped onto my leg. I know that there are 5 things that are always going to be in this question. Those 5 are metaphor, simile, personification, sibilance, alliteration. I know that most of these come up every single year, and I've spotted some sibilants. The terrible sliding stopped silently slope. Now, sibilance is only ever used to create 2 atmospheres. One is a feeling of peace, and the other is sinister threat. I could go for either of those in this circumstance. He might be feeling peaceful because the pain has temporarily stopped as he's no longer being lowered, or it could be sinister because he's worried about what's going to happen to his leg and whether they're going to get to the bottom. So let's see which one of those I go for. 3 faint tugs trembled the taut rope and I hopped onto my leg. That could be peaceful. A wave of nausea and pain swept over me. Oh, we're going for sinister. I was glad of the freezing blasts of snow biting into my face. So obviously he wants to feel pain in his face instead of his leg. So we're going with sinister instead of peace. Perfect. Yeats feels terrible pain and fear, which is why he describes the sliding as terrible. Next, he uses sibilance to emphasise both his relief that the pain has temporarily stopped because the sliding has stopped, but also to emphasise his sense of fear about the sinister implications of his injury, not just the long-term damage to his knee, but the possibility that the descent will end in further tragedy on the slope. Okay, because I'm looking for those 5 features, a wave of nausea. Well, nausea and pain aren't literally a wave, so that's a metaphor. I was glad of the freezing blasts of snow biting into my face. Biting again is a metaphor. Okay, well, it's easy to write about these 2 metaphors. What are they there to do? They're going to dramatise something. This one dramatises the pain, and this one also dramatises the pain because it shows how much he enjoys the pain in his face as a distraction against the pain in his leg, because his leg's broken. Here the pain swept over him as though he was going to be overwhelmed. But here, the metaphor biting into my face is hugely painful, but it's not eating his whole face, it's just into it, so it's contained, and this kind of implies he'll be able to survive the pain. Okay, let's write. He uses metaphor to dramatise the extent of the extreme pain he's suffering. Nausea overcomes him like a wave, which then swept over him as though he could not resist it. However, he next describes the snow as painfully biting into my face. This metaphor suggests that he's actually grateful for an alternative source of pain to take his mind off the agony in his leg. Rather than overwhelming him, this pain is localised into my face, which gives him the confidence that this is a pain he will be able to endure. We also get the sense that he's happy to have something to distract him, no matter how painful. Okay, let's go back to the extract. My head cleared as I waited for the burning to subside from my knee. Well, that's nice, but there isn't an obvious technique in it, so I'm going to ignore it. Several times I had felt it twist sideways when my boot snagged. Okay, well, we've got sibilance again. He's talking about his knee, so this is sinister. It suggests that his knee is very damaged. There would be a flare of agony as the knee kinked back and parts within the joint seemed to shear past each other with a sickening, grisly crunch. Right, well, I have the metaphor of agony being a flare, and I have more sibilance with seamed and sheer and past and sickening and grisly. So I can now describe not just the agony, but his feelings about the implications of that agony, what it means about the damage to the knee. And I'm going to focus on these 2 words, sickening and grisly crunch. So this is a pair of adjectives. Having 2 together shows there's a pattern in his writing, so I'm going to write about that too. The next metaphor describes his pain as a flare of agony. A flare is used as a warning, comma, or a cry for help. And we can infer that Yeats feels desperate for assistance and also desperate that he worries the pain is too great to survive his ordeal on the mountain. He also returns to sibilance as a way to dramatise his worry at the sinister turn of events when he concentrates on the damage inside his knee. His joint seemed to shear, which both suggests that the damage is long-term, but also that he will be reduced to only using one leg in this dangerous descent of the mountain, which might lead to further tragedy. He uses a pair of adjectives to describe his anxiety at the crunch in his knee, which is both sickening and grisly. Okay, I remind myself where I have to stop, so I'm only going to line 31. I had barely ceased sobbing before my boot snagged again. Well, even more sibilance. The fact that he's sobbing suggests that he's completely overcome with pain. And by saying he'd barely stopped before it snagged again implies that he's also worried that the pain is going to overwhelm him because his feet are going to keep snagging. At the end, my leg shook uncontrollably, so perhaps we can argue that he's feeling as though he's losing control. I tried to stop it shaking, but the harder I tried, the more it shook. So that backs up the idea that he is losing control. And he's worried about that, which is why he writes, I tried to stop it shaking. Okay, well, the other thing, of course, is I haven't mentioned any alliteration yet, and I have barely sobbing before boot. What's that emphasising? It's emphasising these repeated stabs of pain each time his boot gets snagged. Okay, because that's a new method, I'm going to impress the examiner by starting there. Next, he uses the alliteration of barely, sobbing, before and boot to emphasise the beats of pain he's getting every time his boot gets snagged. This implies that he's feeling overwhelmed with the pain and doesn't feel he will be able to escape it or manage it. Even when this is over at the end, he focuses on the effect on his leg, which shook uncontrollably. This adverb implies that he is fighting for control but unable to establish it. He emphasises this by returning to the idea in the next sentence with a contrast. But the harder I tried, the more it shook. This conveys his sense of helplessness that he is not going to be able to control either his own emotions or his pain, or indeed how his body reacts. This creates a sense of helplessness. Okay, I know that the examiner wants me to quote from this line because it's the last one in the sequence and they wouldn't have stopped here unless there was something in it. I pressed my face into the snow. It's still sibilance, nothing new. Gritted my teeth and waited. Okay, I've got a sentence in 3 parts, but I can't really think of anything to say about that. At last it eased. Okay, now he's finished this really long paragraph with a short sentence. What is he trying to emphasise here? That he's getting control back. So this introduces a sense of hope, which contrasts with the helplessness we had before. I'll go with that. And I can link that to these actions where he's gritting his teeth and he's waiting, so he's taking control of his body again. However, the paragraph ends with him trying to take control of his body, where he gritted his teeth and then waited. This determination appears to work. Consequently, he ends the paragraph with a 4-word sentence. This dramatic conclusion emphasises his newfound control as the pain eased. This allows us to imagine his feeling of hope in contrast to the earlier feelings of helplessness. This makes sense given the fact that we know he eventually survives as he is writing this account. Well, if you want to get 100% on question 4, and why wouldn't you, that's the video coming up next. Check it out.